Welcome to Killer Women with your host, best-selling author Danielle Girard. The Killer Women vodcast is pleased to be a part of the Authors on the Air Global Radio Network. To learn more about Danielle and her books, visit her at www.daniellegirard.com, and to access all of our vodcasts, go to youtube.com/Authors on the Air. And now, Danielle's next killer woman.
Welcome to Killer Women Podcast, a proud member of the Authors on the Air Global Network with over 4 million listeners. I'm your host, Suspense author Danielle Girard, and my guest today is Lisa Unger. Lisa is a New York Times bestselling and award-winning author. Her books have been published in 32 languages and have been voted Best of the Year or top picks by The Today Show, Good Morning America, Entertainment Weekly, and others. Her nonfiction work has appeared in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, NPR, and Travel Leisure. Lisa lives on the west coast of Florida with her family. Welcome, Lisa.
Hi, Danielle. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. So first off, I guess I should ask, is everything okay in your area of Florida?
Yes, yeah, we're okay. We did think we were going to get a direct hit, and then kind of at the last minute, the storm veered a bit south. We evacuated. So that's, it's not the first time we've evacuated. We live on the water in Florida, so this is sort of a hazard of living here. But yeah, the storm did veer to the south of us, and in areas south of us took a much bigger hit, and we were very, very lucky.
Yeah, it's so crazy. I mean, we're going to talk today about Secluded Cabin Sleep 6, which was so fun and such a fun read. And it's funny because a lot of it, I'm in Montana, so these sort of backwoodsy, type cabins are everywhere around here. But to be in one in Florida was so, in Georgia, I guess the cabin's in Georgia. Yeah. But to imagine you in Florida and all that heat and warmth, it's so interesting. But I obviously am aware of those storms, but I forgot that, I can't imagine. That's very different from living 1,000 miles from the ocean, as it turns out. Don't have.
I mean, it's that kind of weird thing. Like, we're both from the Northeast. My husband and I, he's from Michigan, I'm from New York area, and like sort of all over. But we've been in Florida. We've been in Florida now for 22 years, and we've always lived on the water. And so, and it's a known thing, that, the storms are getting worse, and, the climate is changing.
Yeah.
And so how that plays out for us over the next couple of years, I don't really know for sure, but we're definitely thoughtful about it.
I would imagine. Yeah. It's got to be unnerving, although, we have wildfires, right? There's things about every area, especially as the climate is changing and the world is changing, that are getting heightened. Yeah. So, well, I'm glad you guys are okay. I'm glad it veered south and you didn't have to deal with, because sounds horrible. And obviously you're in your home because it's beautiful, and I can see your bookshelves behind you, so you're safe and sound. Okay, so tell our listeners about Secluded Cabin Sleep 6.
Okay, so when you start Secluded Cabin Sleep 6, you're going to meet Hannah and Mako. They're a brother and sister, and on the outside they kind of seem to have this like idyllic sibling relationship. And Mako is, kind of prone to the grand gesture, and he wants to take his sister and her husband and his wife and their family friend Cricket and her mysterious new boyfriend to a luxurious cabin in the woods. Hannah knows her brother well enough to know that, he's running some kind of an agenda, but she's like, very indulgent of him. And so the three couples head out to this very beautiful but very isolated cabin. And they bring with them all kinds of baggage, secrets and lies, and, a complicated, twisty history with each other. And then there's a stranger, lurking in the shadows, and the stranger is running a dark agenda, looking for revenge on things that happened long before Hannah and Mako were ever born.
Yes. And I just say, like, one of the things I thought you did so beautifully is in that cabin, which is actually beautiful. I imagine it, if you didn't have the spooky agenda, we would all probably love to stay there, right? There's a chef
Yeah.
but some of the details, including the bear's head, which, I mean, I'm sorry, but I've seen we see those heads
Yeah.
everywhere here, of course,
Yeah.
Montana, all the big hunters, but it does add, there is something creepy about having an animal look at you. And
Yeah.
some of the decor, I'm not going to spoil all of it because it's so worth when you get there. Pay attention to some of the decor in that house, and then we can ask Lisa later where that idea came from, because there's some creepy stuff in there. So, was there what was the inspiration for the story?
Well, there's always something. It's usually, I mean, it could be anything. It might be a line of poetry. It could be a news story. It might be a song, a photograph. In one case, it was, even a piece of junk mail. But in the case of Secluded Cabin, it was actually some pandemic vacations that my family and I took to, very similar secluded cabins in places like Blue Ridge, Georgia. In the book, it's Sleepy Ridge, so it's kind of like my imagined area, which is something I tend to do, and Asheville, North Carolina. So we sort of wound up in those places because that's where we could drive,
Right.
and find a place where we could be kind of socially distant and hike and cook it, at home and still, feel like we had gotten away.
Right.
And so, I really enjoyed, and they were very similar to this, very beautifully appointed, very comfortable, but, very isolated and dark. And, I just have that kind of brain, I cannot go on vacation, like it's just too much time off, and my brain just is constantly sort of spinning out dark scenarios, and which is great for fiction and not so great for life. And I tend to do that. So it was there were certain things like, oh, those, wow, that lock code, that's so interesting, does everybody get that same code, or is it different for everybody? There's just these certain things that
Right. Could somebody come
absurdity.
back and let themselves in after they haven't been here for a few months? Exactly.
Right, exactly. So those
Yep.
are the kind of things that I found myself thinking about. And yeah, so that was part of it. One of those trips involved my extended family. So I was traveling with your extended family might also be considered inspirational.
That's right. Right.
And meanwhile, I had, this kind of ongoing obsession with DNA testing.
Right. Talk
Yeah, I
about
think
that.
it's
That's really interesting.
yeah, so it's kind of it's not for me, with the Confessions on the 745, it was social media. For Last Girl Ghosted, it was online dating. It's not so much the technology that interests me, although it is, of course, in this case, incredibly interesting how the DNA testing has evolved over the last 15 years. But it's more that I'm interested in how these technologies are rewriting the way we relate to each other. And
That's a really
yeah,
good point. Those three books are perfect examples of that. And this is, I mean, it's like in the very first scene, I'm not giving anything away by saying that
right,
there's they get these tests
right.
for
Hannah.
Christmas. Yeah,
Yeah,
Hannah and her Mako, and then Mako's, and the parents too. Everybody
right,
gets these tests for
right,
as a present, and the response is very divided. Some people are like, oh, this is kind of interesting, but some people are like, no, thank you.
right.
And
Exactly.
I'm a no, thank you. I'm a
I am as
no,
well. I am as
no,
well.
thank
I'm
you.
gonna think I've done way too much research in the last year, and I was sorely tempted to do it, just for the sake of researching it for the book.
Hmm.
But after doing the reading and understanding more about it's not really the technology or the information that I would be worried about receiving. It's more, for me, I'm worried about who owns that data once you send it to them, and how can it be used in the future.
Hmm. Well,
Um,
and to add a little spice to it, my dad was a sperm donor,
wow.
right?
Okay.
Because
Yeah.
he was a doctor at Stanford in 1970, and they encouraged everybody who was in medical school there to to basically donate sperm,
Wow.
because no, they needed sperm donors, and nobody thought right? So
Right.
there you go. There's your next book. Just
Well, this
kidding.
is I mean, this is exactly
Right,
it, right? Like, no, at one point, the law was it's completely anonymous,
right,
right? You'll never be approached by these children of yours. And then and then, okay, yeah, until the technology changes. And then it's not so much that anybody's given out your information. It's just that if you've submitted your DNA and they've submitted their DNA, and people have gone onto this donor sibling registry and are
right,
looking for connections, they'll find the connections, because it's not just about you. It might also be that your sister gave her
right,
DNA, or your mom did.
right.
So that, like, the privacy gets chipped away with every person in your family who gives away this information.
Yep.
So it's interesting. I mean, there's a lot of interesting things about it. There's there's the group of detectives that are using, or were,
Yes.
until it was ruled unconstitutional pretty recently, using those using those testing kits to send out their DNA samples that they had stored. And then, yeah, you maybe not find the perpetrator, but you might find the perpetrator's cousin
Right.
or
I
something.
do love the fact that cold cases, they can find their way back to killers via, relations that are much more distant than you would imagine. It's not just about finding their sister or their, you can figure out,
Exactly.
and then they can extrapolate how far removed they are and kind of figure out. It's
And what
really that.
kind of leads might come from that. But that's a very slippery slope when you've submitted your DNA because you want to know if you have a pre-existing condition, or like a genetic predisposition for something, and then all of a sudden the police are on your doorstep because something your cousin may or may not have done. Like, that's very questionable. So that's
Right.
definitely something that's in the courts right now. And I think pretty recently it was ruled unconstitutional that no
Yeah.
longer be that.
I think
So
or they had, because nobody approved that, right? We didn't
no.
approve that use for samples. It's
No,
so true.
we didn't sign, whatever. And you just have to be careful. Like, what are you signing? What is
Right.
an implied signature when you
Right.
check that box? And
Right.
it's fine when everything is the way it is, but first of all, corporations have not earned our trust. That's
Mm-mm.
number one. And number two, regimes change, as we know. And it's interesting to consider how that might play out for this.
Right.
Like when you're applying for a job, or you're looking to get Medicaid or insurance.
Right. So true.
I mean, there's
Yeah.
lots to
Yeah.
consider.
Yeah. That's all. And we're not that far from any of those realities, which is terrifying. So,
No, we're not.
so this is your 20th book. Happy 20th book. That's amazing.
Thank
So
you.
tell us about that feeling. And, do you feel like it's easier?
Ah.
I'm guessing I know the answer, but tell us anyway.
Insert maniacal laughter there. Yeah, no, it's not easier. It's also not any less exciting. I never wanted to do anything else with my life. I've been a writer since I was a kid. So I never thought of myself any other way. So I feel immensely grateful that I get to continue to do this with my life, that I make my living doing what I love. That's a real blessing. And I never stop being grateful for that. It's always amazingly exciting when the book, right? I have the actual bound book.
Oh, do you?
I do. Yeah.
Gorgeous, right?
Very
Isn't that the best feeling?
the best feeling. It's the best feeling. It's like it never stops being a moment where I'm like, oh my God, it's here. Like I've
Yeah.
never received that book and been like, here's number 18. Like that's never.
I can't
I
imagine
don't.
that's going to happen,
I don't
right?
think so. I mean, if I do, I promise you, author promise, I'm gonna hang it up. I have never stopped being grateful, never stopped being in love with what I do. So
Yeah.
that's kind of the cool thing. Does it get any easier? It doesn't. Like you sit down to write your next book, or you sit down to do your visions, and you're like, oh shit, do I know how to do this? Like,
Totally, right.
what? Like, I know I just did it. Can I do it again? And honestly, again, same thing. Like, I don't know that I would necessarily
Mhm.
want it to get easier, because I feel like if you think you've got this, you probably have lost it. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like, you just want to, I always want to be on that edge I always want to be on that edge of trying to be better. That's where I've lived, my
Yeah.
whole career. Like every day I believe I can be a better writer than I was yesterday. And I firmly believe that. And it's my goal every day. And more than anything else in my career, that's what motivates me.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think fear, that little bit of fear that,
A little.
what's coming, it drives you to be better. And,
Yeah.
and your books are, it's really clear to us that you are working really hard, which I think readers appreciate. We want to see that I mean, it's not like reading the words are hard because you've made them flawless, but it's
Right.
clear that this is not a book you wrote in a few weeks,
No, no. It's a full year commitment, sometimes more. Sometimes the seed for an idea started long before the book ever, things turn up. I'm like, oh, there it is, like that's, and it's such a deep, for me, it's such a deeply unconscious process. I write
Mhm.
without an outline. I don't know who's going to show up day to day. I don't know what they're going to do. I definitely don't know how my book is going to end. So I'm full in it. I'm full on the inside looking out as opposed to, on the outside looking in. And that's how I live the work, and
I
I have.
love that. You don't talk to a lot of people. I'm also not I'm not an outliner. I've never been successful at that, but it certainly looks lovely to be able to outline. But I love
Right.
to hear that from you, like, because I think we don't hear that very often. So talk a little bit, if you would, about, what do you know going into it?
Mhm.
And how do you sort of like not freak out that you're like, wait, what's going to happen next?
Yeah, I mean, it's such an interesting thing because there's not a lot of thought, there's not a lot of intellect, and there's not a lot of choice. Of course there is, but that's not the way I experience it, so I go into it like, like we were talking about, like, okay, so there's the pandemic cabin visits, there's the idea of like traveling with your extended family and being in like an enclosed area with them for any extended period of time, and there's like, for me, the DNA testing, and then some various news stories that I read, and it just kind of turns around in there and turns around. And then, I feel like the best way I can explain it is like if it connects with something deeper that's going on with me and it's the right moment, I start hearing a voice or
Mhm.
voices. And so I walk into the book with somebody. In this case, it was actually really Henry. I mean,
And
Henry was really my guy. He was the person that was my first like voice, and then Hannah,
yeah.
and like how do these people eventually connect? At the time, I didn't know. I knew that Hannah was a new mom.
Hmm.
I knew that she was very invested in the idea of herself as being the good girl,
Yeah.
that she cleans up the mess, that she's the one you call when things go wrong. Like that's who she is for Cricket. That's who she is for her brother Mako. And like I knew that about her. I knew there was a new baby, and I knew that, things were not what they seemed with her family. And so that's kind of what I knew about her going in. And then, it's interesting because, I have like a vague idea of what the book is going to be about. Like I have a vibe. I know kind of maybe a like a sort of a sketch-ish of what the book is going to be like, just kind of, you know, enough to tell my editor like, hey, this is what I'm going to do. And, she's like, okay.
Let's
And
see. Right.
she could ask, she knows she could ask, but what about, and what if, and can you, and I'm just going to
Yeah.
be like, I don't know, maybe, like it's not there until it's there. Do you know what I'm saying? It's like
Hmm.
I can't tell you what the book is until I'm writing it. And like even intellectually, like for me, like if I'm not writing, there's always like it's always kind of it's always gestating, it's always
Yeah.
in there, it's
Yeah.
always like returning. And then, but it doesn't mean to say I'm thinking, oh, but what if this happened, and then what if that happened? It's not that. It's just in there spinning, and then all of a sudden I hear the next sentence or I see the next
Mhm.
thing, and then I know, okay, I'm back at it, and I can feel that momentum. But it's only in the writing that it's clear to me.
Interesting. So there are times then when you sort of get to a point where you're like, you have to go give yourself some
Yeah, you gotta go
space
to the
because you're like,
gym. You gotta
hmm
go to the gym. You gotta bake a cake. You have to do the laundry.
right.
You
I
have to do
totally hear that.
like, but you can't go on social media. Daniel Palmer and I talk about this. You don't go on social media. You could do sit-ups, but you can't tweet.
You
You
need to
can.
let your brain sort of
You
be
have to
free.
let your brain.
Yeah.
You can walk in the park. You could go throw the ball for your dog. You can do those things. Those things that'll take you to the next to the next space or let your mind relax, but don't do something that, oh, it masquerades as work. Oh, I'm going to go answer 5 emails, or, oh, I'm going to go on Twitter and, do whatever it is we do on that thing.
Right.
And then wonder why you can't get back into your manuscript, because it is not the same brain. And
That's a great point.
if you toggle out to that
Yeah.
brain, you're not coming back, or it's going to
Right.
take you hours to get back.
Right.
You
So
know,
you just sort of think of a day as like, for these hours, whatever it is, it's only the book.
Yeah, so I read it. So this for me, my golden creative hours have always been the early hours, like 5 a.m. to noon. Like
Wow.
that's my time,
Yeah.
like to be creative, like that. And I have a kid, so of course I don't always get that. Sometimes when she was really little, it was like 3 a.m., right? Like you have to get up and do what you have to do, right? You've got to write the book,
Right.
you've got the kid,
Wow.
whatever, you find your way. So like now she's 16 and her life is bigger. And so the space that I have for things is bigger as well, but it's still early morning for me. It's still in that dream brain. Hopefully everybody's still sleeping, and then that's the time before, the stuff starts, like all the chatter of the day.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I read this book a while back, gosh, maybe 5 years, maybe longer now, during a point where I was like, kind of in a state of burnout, not creatively, but just like with everything else,
Yeah.
and I was like, why am I so mentally fried? Why am I so mentally exhausted all the time? I read this book. It's called Deep Work by Cal Newport. I'm an like evangelist for this book. I talk about it to everyone who listens.
Good. I want to
And
read it.
it's, he talked about my big takeaway from it. There's a lot of really interesting, fascinating stuff in there, but my big takeaway was the creative blocks. So you batch your time. So if you're going up to your office or you're going to wherever it is that you write, and you're saying to yourself, the next 2 hours or the next 3 hours or the next 45 minutes or whatever it is that your natural brain energy cycle is, right? For most professional creatives, you can probably squeak out about 3 hours maybe before your brain starts to go, I need something. I need creative.
Right.
Like,
Right.
you keep doing this to me. I need something, right? Like whatever it is. But like you've got those batches where you've set your intention to be creative in those batches, and that if you toggle out during that time, that you are going to have either an impossibility of getting back or a very long drag, and you'll be lesser when you get back to the page if you've been on Twitter doing whatever it is again that you do.
So interesting. Yeah, it makes so much sense to me. I'm a Deep Work. What was the author's name again?
Cal Newport. And
We'll
notably,
find it.
you will not find him on social media.
Right. Why is that? I know.
I find that very refreshing.
Practice. Yeah, you got to practice what you preach. So we were talking about your daughter, which is actually a really lovely segue, I think, into the character of Hannah, who is the daughter of this family, and she's married to a lovely man, Bruce. We were talking a moment earlier before we started recording about you have lovely men in your books, and I said to Lisa that it must mean that she's married to a lovely man, and she said that she is. So, because I think sometimes this is, now I'm getting off on a tangent, but to give it a moment, sometimes I feel like we read a lot about, there are obviously bad men. There's bad men in secluded, cabin, and there's bad men everywhere. But it is also lovely to sort of be able to, really contrast them in the book with the good men. And I really, Henry and also Hannah's husband, Bruce, that they're lovely. It's really lovely to read about them, and they feel very authentic and real. But what I was going to talk about was Hannah has a young child, and so, I wanted to, I mean, your daughter's now 16. My kids are even older than that. But we remember that. So,
Yeah.
that strikes us. This is the first time she's going to leave her baby behind.
Yes.
So talk about that.
Yeah. So this is in the book, this is the first time she's going to leave Gigi, and she's lucky that she has, her mom is not necessarily the person to do it, but Bruce's mom is. And so she really does struggle in that moment of like going away with her husband, and I think we all know that moment, like in new motherhood. I mean, if you're awake, alive, and paying attention and thinking about your life, where you're like, wow, I'm a mom to this little person now. Like everything I do matters to her. You know what I mean? Every choice I make impacts her. And yeah, I'm still myself, and I'm still, a wife to my husband. I still want a couplehood. And then how do you wind up balancing all of those? I mean, most of us, sort of are aware of that struggle,
Yes.
and so I really felt that. And I will say with my daughter Ocean, and this is actually kind of a funny aside, she is 16, and she's like, total good Nick, like sweet kid, and all that. But Jeff and I just recently went to Scotland.
Oh yeah.
I went to Bloody Scotland, which was amazing. But it really was the first time that we went on vacation without our daughter.
Yeah.
Which
Which is insane. She's 16.
It's crazy. If it wasn't really vacation, it was work, but it was we tried also to have vacation, and it was like, she came on every book tour with me. She came everywhere, all over the world with me, because I was not hardwired to leave her, and not hardwired to stop doing what I did. So we had to figure out, how does that work as a family? And usually that meant my husband would come, my parents would come,
Wow.
I mean, like it was the worst, like clingiest, most chaotic entourage that anybody ever put together for themselves.
But you made it work. Like you recognize
it any other way.
Exactly.
I would not have. I don't know how I did it, looking back on that now. And I think that's always true, like in writing, like especially when you're writing about something like that, like when you're in those moments of conflict and, sort of fracture, like internal fracture, am I this, am I that, am I, can I be a good mom? Can I also write? Can I do all this stuff? Like you can't really write about it because you're in it. It's only when you've moved past it that you can look back and go and have that real perspective on it.
It's so true. Yeah. And 16 years is about the length of time it takes, I think, to have perspective on how hard those first years are.
To get through the trauma.
Yeah, exactly. I know. It's terrible.
We survived.
So it's like there's some quote that says, as being a parent is being some tiny person's bitch, which I love because it is.
It's so
like
true.
They're just like
do anything for them. You just
totally.
100%. Like they're all different kinds of parents, but like if you're that kind of parent where you live for your kid, if you're those kind of parents where you live for your kids, where you at some point do stop living for yourself and live for your kids, then you're definitely their bitch. Like no doubt, you're gonna do anything for them no matter what.
Totally. And unfortunately, like I always thought, oh no, my kids, but they still like 20 and 22. They're like, Mom, I need. I'm like,
Mom, I need. Okay.
Totally. My Amazon bill is always like, wait, who has been in my Amazon account? The children have been in there. Well, I love, and I also sort of love, so Mako is the older sibling.
Yeah.
But, and Hannah, the younger sibling, but I also love that Hannah seems kind of like that. There's something about the firstborn who's usually the caregiver, that takes care of everything. But Hannah does that so much for her brother, and and still does it today, and has done it. We see flashbacks of that happening when they were younger, and it's I think there's so many that felt so authentic to me, and I'm sure to many people in our audience. So what do you think, what about her inspired you, like that? Do you know where that came from?
Yeah, I mean, I guess to some degree, and there's always this conversation about character, right? Like, how much of you is of your character, and it's like nothing and everything, is
Right.
the answer to that.
Right.
It's like it's all me, right? I mean, even if I don't experience it that way, it's all my imagination, some amalgamation of my ideas, my observations, my real relationships,
Yeah.
imagined things overheard, like that's the writing life, right? Is like observation, and then if you're paying attention, that stuff works its way into the fiction, right? So like for Hannah, I feel like there's a little piece of me in her, in that like I always do consider myself to be like that captain safety, like I'm the one who's like, don't run on the pool deck.
Right. Right.
Like, I'm the one that's cringing when all the kids are like jumping in the pool.
Right.
I'm that person who's like, hey, watch out for that, blah, blah, blah. And everyone's like, oh God, but like, I'm like that captain safety, like that safety. Like my favorite kind of person is like a safety engineer who like thinks about how to prevent accidents from happening.
Right. Right. I'm with you. I'm that way too. I agree.
Right?
Everyone's
I
like,
mean, like
come
there's a
on. But
science to
then you're
this
just
stuff.
picturing, like, I immediately can picture like the gushing head wound that's going to happen if two kids hit heads
Yeah.
in the way into the water or whatever.
I mean, come on, it happens. So it's like it's all. So I'm always that person, So there's a little bit of that, I think, in me, and I just think that it's such a natural kind of like seesaw of a relationship that you can see that like almost like you could cross over that line from being the caretaker, the good one, the smart one, the one who cleans up the mess, to being like an enabler to the point where people behave even more badly because they know you're there to clean up the mess.
Right.
And
Which
so
we,
I'm always
right. Which is
interested in
so
that.
interesting.
Yeah, and there's always these dynamics in families,
Yeah.
right? There's always and there, sometimes it's like a predator prey relationship. Sometimes it's like the narcissist and the narcissistic feeder, the addicted and the enabler, the kind of like, the codependent,
Right.
that type of thing. And like, I think that, these relationships are something that we're all familiar with. Even, if it's not us, we can see it in somebody else. And, that's what that fascinates me. And it's fully a theme that you probably could pick out of any of my novels, is like this
Yes.
idea of the family, like it's bought and sold, especially around the holidays. The big collected family gets together,
Right.
everyone is like joined in love and support, and it's all perfect and past the gravy and whatnot. And then it's like under the table, there's a whole, sort of labyrinth of, interpersonal dynamics that, form us.
Yeah. Family's
Form-
messy. That's what
yeah.
I love about this book is it's family's messy. And I also love the dynamic that happens between, Mako, who Hannah loves, and her husband, because Hannah is really sort of in the middle of those two relationships in a kind of an interestingly can be tense way, right? Because she
Yeah.
adores both of them in different
Yeah.
ways.
Yeah.
And that's a real tension for her.
Yes. And I also love that dynamic as well. And, this is something that I've seen in my own life, is where the spouse comes in and has a completely different perspective on the dysfunction and is like, whoa, wait a minute. This is not okay. This is
Wait, don't mess with our dysfunction. What do you
right. Like,
mean?
this
Yeah.
is not okay. You're right. Exactly. And nobody wants that guy to start messing
No.
around with the script. We don't need an editor like to come in and start rewriting and doing whatever. But like, but that is what happens.
Yeah.
Like if you've done your work and you've chosen well in your spouse, you may have somebody come into your family that goes, this is not
Yeah.
going to fly. I'm gonna,
It-
I don't want this in my life or in the life of my child,
right.
who might
Right.
be who might be your grandchild.
Right. It's
right?
really,
And
yeah, it's super
it's so
interesting.
complicated. It's so complicated. And, like, and also that idea of like family, right? Like, what is it? Is it biology? Is it choice? Is it action? You know,
Perfect. I was gonna actually talk about that because I do think that there's an interesting, they especially once you have a baby, right? I feel like when you're a
yeah,
married couple, your
yeah,
family still relates. I think I always thought of my family still as like my parents and my
yes,
siblings, but when
yes,
you have a baby, it's a different family unit and it
yes.
changes everything.
It's the family that you have created.
Hmm.
So your spouse has brought what he or she has brought forward from from that family of origin, and you've brought forward from your family of origin, all different stuff. And but you've chosen each other,
Yeah,
you picked each other, you're not biologically related to each other until
hopefully.
you have, hopefully, yeah, until you have a child,
Right.
right? And then there's this link between you that now you have come together and you are the family of origin for your.
Yeah. And it means pulling yourself away from your family, your original family, and also that feels weird sometimes for siblings who are not yet. I think Mako's perspective of the baby is not, he doesn't understand it in the way obviously the Hannah
Well, right.
understands it.
Yeah, Mako's like, oh, just leave the baby. It's not a big
Right.
deal if you don't leave the baby. And it's like,
Right.
and you so know that from being a young parent or being a new parent or being the first parent
Hmm.
in your family, among your siblings. And like
Totally.
looking at them and thinking, oh man, you just do not get it. You don't get it. Like
You wait.
there is no
Yeah.
vacation. It's not there is no vacation. You don't turn that. You don't ever stop being somebody's mom if you're that kind of mom. You don't
Mm.
ever, even if you were to go away, it would be so fraught with
It, right. It's so
you've been
true.
cooking for a week, you're tortured by guilt,
Oh,
like
right.
the phone rings constantly, you're constantly calling, like even when moving to Scotland, like the stream of texts from my parents and my daughter was like, it was actually hilarious.
You're like, wait, this is not a vacation because I feel like I'm just
I was
talking
like,
to you guys nonstop.
wow, like I've still got the app, that tracks my daughter, that Life 360.
Right.
Like I'm still watching it, but I'm in Scotland.
I know. I track my
I'm in
children
the
and they are
Highlands. I'm like,
adults.
oh, Ocean's at Panera.
I That's awesome. Well, I think you're right. It doesn't the mothering thing doesn't go away. So I know we're limited on time.
Oh
I have
yeah.
two more quick questions
Oh yeah.
one quickie and one a little bit longer.
Okay.
I want to know if you let your daughter read your books because that was always a bone of contention in our house.
Yeah, she has started reading. Yeah, because it was funny because she didn't really, generally speaking, didn't have any interest.
Mhm.
Like when she was little, she was interested in what I did, but she didn't ever make the leap to think I could be reading. And then suddenly her friends were older, and all of a sudden her friends were reading my books. Like their moms were reading it, and then they were taking, and they're like, I read your mom's book, and she's like, I never read your book. And I was like, okay, well, when when you want to read, you can start to read. And so she reads the books, and and then we sit down and talk about it, which is
Awesome.
a complete mind blow. I mean,
Totally.
complete mind blow. And she even said just the other day, she's like, it's so funny when I read your books, like I see all these pieces of you and me and dad and others, and I hear your voice, and and I always find that, I mean, I never really imagined that moment
Right.
talking to my daughter about my books. But in some sense, I feel like, she'll, if she wants it, she'll have that. She'll always have,
Yeah.
because it's all of me. I mean, I put all of myself into that book every year. Like
Yeah.
every piece of my psyche, goes in there in some way or another. Not that I give all of myself. My family always comes first,
Yeah.
but to the degree that I can, I give all of myself to the work. And that, I'm happy that she'll, if no one else,
Well,
she'll
obviously,
she'll
there's
have
lots,
that.
but
She'll
it
have
is
that
right,
library.
right.
Like
I
she could
do. I
open
love that.
any of those books and find me
Yeah, that's
at
so
that
sweet to think
at
of it
that
that way.
moment. Yeah.
Well, it's I love that, and I think that's right. When they get ready, when they want to read them, that's the time.
Yeah.
I have one who does and one who doesn't, so that's where I am on that.
Yeah, some people
Um,
don't want to read their parents' books. That's for
I
sure.
get that.
Yeah.
I 100% get that. Okay, so before you have to leave us, tell us what is next, Lisa. What can you tell us what you're working on?
I
Don't
will
you
not.
hate that question? You're like, excuse me, I just am putting out a book right this minute, and you wanted to ask me what's coming after that?
I am not going to tell you, Danielle. I'm not going to tell you.
Dang.
So here's my thing, which is funny because it's really about process. So I am done with my next book, and I am in, sort of the revision process. But like, I will not be able to talk about that book until like right now, like this week is the first time I'm actually talking about Secluded Cabin Sleep Sick. Because like I can't, like, it's almost like it takes me that long to figure out what I wrote, right? It may take me, like, I have to write something else and be working, in this case, a novel, a short story, and a novella, since I wrote
Wow.
this.
Yeah.
And it takes me that time to go, what did I actually write?
That's hilarious. So you sit you sit back, you take it cold and read it again before you're gonna have to talk about it?
No. Once it's bound, I'll never look at it again.
But it's in you.
No,
it's
no.
totally in you.
It is completely, but I will never look at it again, because anytime you're in your work, you're rewriting, right? Like,
That's so true.
if
Right.
I mean, if I were to open this up, I would find 50 things I wanted to do better, and it would torture me.
Totally. I totally get it.
Book, unless somebody forces me to read from it.
Yes, well, they might do that, but it's a beautifully bound book.
Unless somebody forces me to read from it, I'm not looking at it, because it's a done deal. And I mean, I might, like, these days you can, because of course any mistake you have made will come to you in from every possible direction.
Yes.
Be it social media, email, etc. Like,
yeah.
I found on page 64 that you blah blah blah, and you're like, okay, great, thanks. And then you write to your editor, oh, there's a typo on page 64.
Right.
And they can push it now to the E, and then they can put it in the paperback. But it doesn't matter. It's still flawed. It's still, so like, once you know, you're like, what else can I find if I started?
Right. Can you just send these directly to this email address instead of to me?
I'm going to put that on my autoresponder. If you've written to tell me about a typo in a book that you got from the library that's 10 years old.
Right. Here's your email. Yeah. Lisa Unger trash @gmail.com. Exactly. I love it. That's it. Okay, so Lisa, you have a fabulous newsletter. I subscribe. So tell listeners where to find you on social media and your website, and to, of course, join your newsletter, because that's where we first get to see your cover reveals.
Oh yes, absolutely. So my newsletter is you can subscribe to it via the website lisaunger.com, and if you do subscribe to it, you get a free short story called The 20. Yes. And I love my newsletter. I do it every month. It's a pretty big undertaking, but like, some of the people who are reading that newsletter have been reading it for like 20 years.
Amazing.
And that's kind of amazing, and
it's not, you don't make blow. It's not a huge, I mean, it's an undertaking for you, but it's a lovely, like, always fun, always really valid news. It's fun. I
always try to keep it very light and fluffy, very fast. I'm, mindful of people's time. I really try to make sure, I put a lot into it so that it's fun for people when they open it. I want it to be, actual stuff that they might want to know about. And so I do, definitely sort of keep that in mind when I'm creating it. And it's great to have, like, and occasionally I'll like send out this email and be like, hey, if you want to unsubscribe, go ahead, no hard feelings, because you just want to call the list a little bit. You want to make sure
Yeah,
people that are receiving it, and you always get back all these responses. No, I love your newsletter. And I'm always like, okay, great. So that's good. And of
that's
course,
awesome.
I'm sure some people unsubscribe, but my husband doesn't tell me that. So
Right. Good job. Good job,
it's
Jeff.
like,
That's
oh, your
important.
mom unsubscribed. Oh, okay.
That was an error. This is not a techie generation. I'm sure it was a mistake. Okay, and then on social media, because I know you're everywhere.
I'm everywhere, which is, yeah, I'm everywhere. You cannot miss me. I'm on Instagram at LA Unger. I'm on Twitter at Lisa Unger, which it tells you how old I am. So it's not like
Yes.
Lisa Unger, like 396 or whatever. It's like,
Well, just how fast you were to get on there. Good for
yeah,
you.
OG on that one.
O-
And
O-
then on Facebook at author Lisa Unger.
Okay. Well,
And
start with lisaunger.com, everybody. That's the best place. And Secluded Cabin Sleep 6 is out November 3rd,
November
2nd,
8th.
8th.
November 8th. Yeah.
So I'm off on
November.
my days. It's
That's okay.
it's out super soon. It's fabulous. Everybody must pick it up. And actually all of your books. It's really so they all have really fun twists, and they're lovely read. You're a beautiful writer. So thank you for joining me, everybody. Thanks for joining us on Killer Women with my guest today, Lisa Unger, and we will see you next time. Bye.
Thank you.